He's dying. Those 2 words fell over Silverstone Pack like a death sentence at midnight. Not a sickness. Not a wound. Not a curse any elder could name or any healer could trace to its root. The future alpha of the most powerful wolf pack in the northern mountains, heir to the bloodline of Robert Blackwood, the most feared and respected alpha in 3 generations, had simply refused to feed. 3 days. 3 days since the Luna had died in childbirth, leaving behind only silence and a son who screamed at every touch except his father's. And even his father's arms could only quiet the crying. They could not make the pup feed, could not make him latch, could not fill that hollow, desperate hunger eating through his tiny body hour by hour. The healers whispered the word they were all afraid to say aloud. Cursed. And in the shadows of the pack house, shoved into a corner of the servants' hall, a girl named Emma Voss sat with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes fixed on the floor, pretending she had not heard what the Gamma's wife had just said about her. They're considering bringing in the outcast girl. The weak one. Can you imagine? An unmated, powerless girl touching the alpha heir. Robert will never allow it. Emma pressed her lips together and said nothing. She never said anything. That was the thing about being nobody. You learned very quickly that silence was the only armor that never ran out. Part 1. The boy who refused to live the night Lyra Blackwood died. The whole pack heard Robert's howl. It wasn't the howl of a wolf who had lost a mate, though he had. It wasn't the sound of a man broken by grief, though he was. It was something older and rawer than either of those things. It was the sound of an alpha whose soul had been split in two, whose bond had been severed mid-breath, who had held his mate's hand and felt the exact moment the warmth left her fingers. The pack fell silent. Even the wind stopped. Then, from inside the room, came a different sound, small, fierce, indignant. A baby's cry. Robert named him Kale from the old language, meaning storm, because even at 3 hours old, the child had his mother's stubborn jaw and his father's furious eyes. And he had screamed as if he already understood the world had taken something from him. But the screaming slowed by the second morning. By the third, it had faded to something worse than crying, a thin, exhausted whimper that made the healers exchange glances over the pup's bassinet with their mouths pressed flat and their eyes heavy. He won't latch to any wet nurse, healer Mara reported to Robert, who stood at the window with his back to the room and his hands folded behind him like a man holding himself together through sheer street. Rupture, we've tried for women. He refuses everyone. He cries harder when they hold him. As if she hesitated. As if what Robert's voice was quiet. That was the dangerous register the pack knew, not the shout, the quiet, as if their scent is wrong, Mara finished carefully. As if he's searching for something specific and growing furious that he can't find it. Robert turned around. His eyes, charcoal gray, the color of a sky before lightning, moved to the bassinet in the corner where his son lay to still, to pale, his tiny chest rising and falling with effort that shouldn't have been effort at all. Then find what he's searching for, Robert said. I don't care what it takes. Bring every unmated female in this pack if you have to. Find whatever he needs. What he did not say, because Robert Blackwood did not say things like this, was, please, he's all I have left of her. Please don't let him follow her, please. But every person in that room heard it anyway. They brought the Lunas first. It was protocol, tradition, the wisdom of the elders who said that the strongest women carried the strongest comfort. And a pup who needed his mother's scent would find the nearest echo of it in a woman of rank and power. Luna Sierra of the Crescent Ridge pack came with her dark hair braided over one shoulder and her smile practiced and patient. She had nursed 3 children of her own. She moved slowly. Let the pup scent her wrist before she reached for him. Spoke in the low murmur that experienced mothers used, the moment she lifted him. Kale began to scream. Not fussing. Not discomfort. A full-throated, desperate, get away from me scream that filled the entire nursery and brought 2 healers running from the hallway. Luna Sira stepped back and handed the child off with wide eyes and a slightly offended look she was too dignified to voice. "I've never had that reaction," she said. "Not once in my life." They brought 6 more over the next 2 days. 6 Lunas, for senior healers, to women from neighboring packs who had reputations for being gifted with newborns. A wise woman from the mountain settlement who claimed to have never met a pup she could not soothe. Kale screamed at every single one of them. He grew weaker with each hour. His skin took on a translucent quality that made healer Mara press her hands together and close her eyes in the hallway and breathe very slowly. Thinking thoughts she did not share with the Alpha. On the 4th night, the elders gathered. Elder Goran, who was 70 years old and had the look of a man who had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it, sat at the head of the council table and said what no one else would say directly: "The child is choosing," he said. Silence. "He is not sick. He is not cursed. He is an alpha bloodline pup with instincts so strong they came in before his eyes could open. He knows what he wants, and what he wants is not what we have offered him." Goran folded his gnarled hands on the table. "We have been bringing him rank. We should have been bringing him the right scent." "Then what scent?" Robert asked. He was sitting at the opposite end of the table. He hadn't slept. Emma could have told anyone who looked at him that grief and sleeplessness looked exactly like that. Like a man still holding the same position he'd been in when the news hit. As if moving might make it real, Goran was quiet for a moment. "Bring everyone," he said finally, "not just the Lunas, not just the ranked females. Every unmated woman in the pack, the settlements, the borderlands. Start with the ones you would least expect." Part 2. The girl who expected nothing. Emma Voss had been least expected for as long as she could remember. She was 22 years old and had never shifted. That single fact defined her entire existence in Silverstone Pack in the way that certain facts tend to define people, completely, unfairly, and permanently. It wasn't that she was sickly. She was healthy enough. Small but not fragile. Quiet but not vacant. Her eyes were an unusual color, a dark amber that sometimes looked almost gold in certain light. And her hair was dark brown and always slightly untidy because she spent most of her time in the pack's laundry and kitchen, where tidiness was impractical. She had no rank, no family. Her parents had died when she was 7, and the distant cousins who'd taken her in had done so with the specific energy of people doing the minimum required. She had no mate, no prospects, no particular hope of either. She was not disliked exactly. She was simply overlooked, in the way that furniture is overlooked, noticed only when it's in the way. She had grown accustomed to it. She had, even in her more honest moments, grown comfortable with it. Invisible meant untouched. And touched meant safe. She was in the middle of folding bedsheets when Beta Kieran found her. He looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for Beta Kieran, who had the bearing of a man who had made a career of looking comfortable in every situation. He stood in the doorway of the laundry room and cleared his throat and did not meet her eyes, which told Emma immediately that whatever he was about to say was something he had not been looking forward to saying. "Emma Voss," he said. "Beta," she said, and waited. "By Elder Goran's directive, all unmated females in the pack are to be." He paused. Started again. "The alpha heir has not fed. You've heard." "I've heard," Emma said carefully. "We are bringing every available unmated female to the nursery to be assessed." Another pause. "Including you." Emma's hand stilled on the sheet she was folding. She looked at him steadily. "I'm not a healer. I have no experience with infants. I've never." "I know," Kieran said, and the discomfort in his voice made it clear that he agreed with every objection she was raising and was bringing her anyway because he had been told to bring everyone. And everyone meant everyone, and his own opinions on the likelihood of a powerless, unshifted laundry girl succeeding where 6 Lunas had failed were not relevant to his instructions. "All right," Emma said, and put the sheet down. She didn't change her clothes. She didn't bother. She followed Beta Kiran through the pack house in her worn gray dress with a small stain on the hem from the morning's breakfast service, her hair half loose from its braid, her hands still slightly damp from the laundry. She passed 3 ranked females in the corridor, who looked at her with expressions ranging from puzzlement to a specific kind of affront that said, "Why are you here?" Without saying it, Emma looked straight ahead and kept walking. The nursery was warmer than she expected. It smelled of herbs, something mild and calming that the healers had been diffusing, and of the clean soap used on newborns, and underneath both of those things, the faintest trace of something sharp and grief-soaked that Emma recognized as the scent of a person holding themselves very deliberately together. Robert Blackwood was standing against the far wall. She had seen him before, of course. Everyone in the pack saw their alpha at gatherings and training events and the occasional dispute resolution, but she had never been in the same room with him at a distance of less than 15 feet, and the experience was quietly startling. He was very tall, broad in the shoulders, dressed plainly in dark clothes as if he had given up on the performance of normalcy and gone straight through to the other side of it. His face was the kind of face that in other circumstances might have been called handsome, but grief had stripped it down to its essential structure: jaw, cheekbone. The horizontal line of a mouth held flat. His eyes went to her when she entered, stayed there for a moment, not with recognition, but with the assessing quality of a man cataloging everyone in his space. Then they moved away. Emma understood. She was the last entry in a long list of things that hadn't worked. Healer Mara came to her, explained briefly and without condescension, that the pup had not fed, that every approach had been tried, that they were now attempting scent-based approaches on Elder Goran's guidance. That Emma should not take it personally if the child reacted badly. That she should hold him only if she felt comfortable doing so. Emma nodded to all of this. She stepped to the bassinet. Cale Blackwood lay on his back, impossibly small, his eyes closed, his face pinched with an exhaustion that looked wrong on a 4-day-old infant, too knowing, too deliberate. As if he had made a decision and was committed to it. His chest rose and fell. His tiny hands were curled against his chest like two small fists. Emma looked at him for a long moment. She did not feel the instinct to coo at him the way some of the other women had, or to announce herself to the room, or to perform care for the benefit of the audience standing behind her. She felt something quieter and more interior than any of that. Something like recognition, although that made no sense, because she had never seen this child before in her life. She reached in slowly and picked him up. He fussed immediately, the same reflexive protest he'd given everyone else, and she did not adjust her hold or try to soothe him with sound. She simply brought him in against her chest, settled him against her sternum, and held him there. She heard someone behind her exhale sharply. She heard Robert move because Cale had gone still. Not the stillness of shock. Not the momentary quiet of a child too tired to keep crying. Something else. Something that moved through his small body, like a wave settling, like water finding its level. His hands uncurled slowly. His face, which had been tight with effort and protest, smoothed out into something that looked almost unbearably like relief. And then he turned his head. This 4-day-old infant, who was not supposed to have the muscle control for deliberate movement, and pressed his face directly over Emma's heart. And stayed there. The room was silent enough that Emma could hear her own heart beat. She wondered if the baby could too. She felt, and she would think about this later, alone in the laundry room, turning it over and over in her hands like a stone she'd found that might be ordinary or might be extraordinary. She felt something happen in her chest. Not a physical thing. Something deeper than physical. A kind of click, like a lock turning, like a door she hadn't known existed swinging open into a room full of warm light. "He's feeding," Healer Mara said, very quietly, from somewhere behind her. Emma looked down. He was Part 3. What blood doesn't know. Nobody in that room had a word for what they were seeing. Robert had a word, but he couldn't make himself say it yet. He stood 3 feet away from a girl he didn't know. A girl with damp hands and a stained hem who had apparently accomplished in 40 seconds what 6 lunas and for senior healers had failed to accomplish in 4 days. And he felt something crack open in the wall he'd been building around his grief since the night Lyra died. Not jealousy. Not resentment. Something more complicated than either. She knows him, Robert thought, and the thought made no sense and was also completely and utterly true. She knows him, and he knows her, and neither of them has ever met. Elder Goran arrived 20 minutes later. Someone must have sent for him immediately, and stood in the doorway of the nursery for a long moment, watching Emma seated in the nursing chair with the alpha heir against her heart. The pup fed and sleeping with the trusting total body relaxation of a newborn who has finally found safety. The elder's expression was not surprised. It was the expression of a man who had suspected, and was now watching the confirmation of his suspicion arrive exactly on schedule. He said, which was his way of saying I knew it. What is she? Robert asked. His voice was still very quiet, but it had shifted from the quiet dangerous into something else, a register Emma couldn't quite name, though she would think about it later. Quieter than dangerous. Something more like open. She is what she is, Goran said, moving to stand beside Robert, both of them watching Emma and the child with the focused attention of men seeing something they need to understand. Which is what the child needs. That tells me nothing. It tells you everything. The pup is an alpha bloodline with ancient instincts. He was not looking for a wet nurse. He was not looking for rank or power, or the correct social standing. Goran paused. He was looking for the one whose heartbeat matches the memory in his blood. Robert was quiet for a moment. Explain that. There are souls, Goran said, choosing his words with the care of a man who has been choosing words about difficult things for 70 years, that are bound to each other in ways that precede the bodies they occupy. Most people live and die without encountering those bonds, because the circumstances that would reveal them never arise. But occasionally, he nodded toward the nursing chair, the circumstances arise. She's not his mother, Robert said. The words came out with more force than he'd intended. No, Goran agreed. Not by blood. Not in the way your mate was his mother. Something gentle entered the elder's voice, the first fully gentle thing Robert had heard from any source in 4 days, and it hit him somewhere undefended. But there are different kinds of knowing, different kinds of belonging. His instincts recognized something in her that has nothing to do with bloodline, whether we have a name for it or not. Robert looked at the girl in the chair. Emma Voss was not watching them. She was watching the child, looking down at him with an expression Robert recognized, because he had seen it on Lyra's face in the few hours they'd had together after the birth. That specific quality of astonishment and recognition that new mothers had when they looked at their children, as if they were seeing someone they already knew from somewhere they couldn't quite place. The expression did not look like a girl performing care for an alpha's benefit. It looked like a girl who had just found something she hadn't known she was missing. Part 4. What she carried. Emma did not know how to explain what had happened in the nursing chair, so she did not try. She sat with the child for 2 hours that first night, and when Cale finally fell into the deep, even sleep of a body that had been fed and was now recovering, she handed him carefully, reluctantly, and with the sensation of setting down something she had just been given, to healer. Mara, and then she stood up and looked at the Florian waited to be dismissed. She was not dismissed. Stay, Robert said. It was not a soft request. It was the kind of word that came from a person used to being obeyed, but it landed on Emma less like a command and more like, she thought about this later, a hand reaching for something it was afraid of dropping. She stayed. He did not ask her anything that night. He sat on the other side of the nursery with his forearms on his knees and looked at his sleeping son and occasionally looked at Emma with an expression she couldn't read. And Emma sat in the chair and looked at her hands and thought about the click she had felt in her chest and tried to decide if she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. She had never been the kind of person who invented comfort. Invented comfort was for people who could afford the disappointment when it didn't hold. Emma had made a very thorough accommodation with the real texture of her life, the smallness of it, the solitude of it, the way she moved through the pack's world like a ghost who happened to do laundry. She was not unhappy. She was simply truthfully untethered. And now something had tethered her. She did not know what it meant. She was not naive enough to build a story around it. A powerless, unshifted outcast girl sitting in the Alpha's nursery was not the beginning of anything that ended well in the stories Emma knew. She held no rank. She had nothing to offer a man like Robert Blackwood except the impossible coincidence of her heartbeat being the thing his son needed. But the click in her chest was real, and when Cale made a small sound in his sleep and her whole body moved toward him with an instinct so immediate it bypassed thought entirely, she understood that something had changed in her that was not going to unchange. Part 5. The Alpha's understanding. Robert spent the fifth night in the chair across from Emma, not because he had asked to, not because it was expected, because Cale was sleeping, finally sleeping with the steady full-body ease of a newborn who is no longer fighting for something, and Robert could not make himself leave the room where that was happening, and Emma was in the room, and so he sat across from her in the dark nursery with one lamp burning low, and the sound of his son breathing between them. "How long have you been in the pack?" he asked. It was 2 a.m. Emma considered the question as if it were more complicated than it looked. "Since I was 7, she said. "My parents were from the Ashfield settlement. They died in the border conflict." Robert remembered the border conflict. He'd been 17 and had not yet assumed his father's title, but he remembered it, 3 weeks of skirmishing with a rival pack over territory, 3 casualties on their side, a handful of families from the outer settlement disrupted or displaced. He had not, at 17, thought about the children those families left behind. "You've been here 15 years, he said. "Yes, I don't know you." "No," Emma agreed. Without any particular inflection, it was a fact. Not an accusation. Emma did not seem to deal in accusations. "Why haven't you shifted?" A pause. "I don't know," she said. "The healers said it might come late." "It hasn't come yet." She said it the way she said most things, straightforwardly, without the apologetic quality that most unshifted wolves in a shifted pack learn to adopt as protective coloring. As if it were simply a piece of information about herself that she was passing along without particular shame or particular pride. Robert looked at her in the low light. She was not what he would have described as remarkable if he had been asked to describe her before tonight. Small, dark-haired, eyes that were an unusual color he was only now noticing, a dark amber that caught the lamplight in a way that made them look briefly, startlingly gold. But he had been watching her with his son for 2 hours, and remarkable was exactly what he would call what he had seen. Not in performance, not in effort, in the effortlessness of it, the way she held Cale as if her body had always known the specific weight and angle of him, the way she looked at him with that expression that Robert kept seeing out of the corner of his eye and kept having to look away from because it hit him somewhere tender. "He chose you," Robert said. Emma looked up from the bassinet, met his eyes for the first time directly, and held the look without flinching, which Robert noted because most people flinched. "It seems so," she said. "Elder Gorn has a theory about why. I heard some of it." She paused. "I don't know if I understand it." "Neither do I," Robert said. "But I've seen it now with my own eyes, and I've stopped arguing with what my eyes tell me." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what to call this." "You don't have to call it anything," Emma said. "Not tonight." It was a simple thing to say. An obvious thing. But Robert had been surrounded for 4 days by people offering him explanations and protocols and traditions and the correct grief responses of an alpha male. And the simplicity of "you don't have to call it anything tonight" struck him so precisely in the middle of his exhaustion that he had to press his jaw tight for a moment and look at the ceiling. "No," he said after a moment, "I suppose I don't." Epilogue. Heartbeat. Cale Blackwood grew strong. He fed every time Emma held him, and grew round-cheeked and fierce-eyed and loud in the way of children who are deeply loved. Demanding, willful, curious. Entirely certain that the world was arranged for their benefit and deeply unimpressed when it suggested otherwise. He had his father's eyes and his mother's jaw and something that was entirely his own. A quality of absolute recognition when Emma walked into a room. A turning toward that happened before he could see her. As if he felt the approach of her before it became visible. As if some part of him tracked her the way a compass tracks north. The pack talked, of course they talked. An unranked girl without a shift. The alpha heir's chosen comfort, installed in the pack house, present at every feeding. The whispers were predictable and Emma heard most of them, and let them pass through her the way she had always let things pass through her. She was tethered now, she didn't need anything else. Robert did not ask her to stay. He didn't need to. Cale's needs made the arrangement self-evident. But he did begin to do something else, something gradual and so quiet Emma almost didn't notice. He began to be present in the room when she was there. Not always. Not obviously. But in the way of a man who finds reasons to be in certain places, who discovers that his evenings have reorganized themselves around a particular nursery, who starts to look for a set of dark amber eyes when he enters a room and registers their absence when they're not there. He said very little about this. Emma said nothing about it at all. But one evening, Cale, 7 weeks old, sleeping in his bassinet with the smug satisfaction of a child who has just eaten and is entirely pleased with himself, Robert sat in the chair across from Emma and looked at her with that charcoal gray gaze that had started to feel, to Emma, less like assessment and more like the specific attention of a person seeing someone clearly. "You shifted," he said. She looked up. "Yesterday evening in the East Garden, I know. I saw you." A pause. "Late bloomer. That's what they said." What did it feel like? Emma considered this. Outside, the summer night was warm and the pack was moving through its evening routines. The distant sounds of people and the tree frogs and the occasional wolf's voice from the training fields. And inside the nursery it was quiet and warm and smelled of the herbs and the child and, underneath those things, the particular scent of the man across from her that Emma had started to recognize the way she recognized very few things in her life, with the deep, unnarged certainty of the body. "It felt like coming home," she said, like something that had always been waiting finally decided the time was right. Robert looked at her for a long moment. "I think I understand that," he said. Cale stirred in the bassinet and made a small, commanding sound. The future alpha's habitual announcement that he was awake and required attention, and Emma stood and went to him, and lifted him, and felt the familiar click of his small warm weight against her chest and his face pressing instinctively over her heart, his heartbeat, her heartbeat, finding each other in the dark the way they always had, the way they always would, across whatever distance blood and time and ordinary circumstance tried to put between them. Not by blood. By something older than blood. By the kind of knowing that lives in the chest, not the mind, that can't be explained or argued with or ranked or assigned. The kind that simply is. And in the chair across the room, Robert Blackwood watched his son find peace against a heartbeat that was not his mother's, and understood, for the first time since the night of the hall, that love was not a thing that ran out when the source of it was taken away. It found new shapes. It always did,